So we are actually hosting an event, a workshop type event called Community Conversations, and this is targeted at reducing stigma in small rural communities and opening up conversations about people that are dealing with addictions and substance use disorder.
And what kind of stigmas are you talking about?
So stigma is related to substance use disorder in those individuals and the kind of treatment that they need, how things should work, all kinds of things like that.
When you say stigma, is it like, are you talking about incorrect ideas that the community has?
Yes.
Can you give me some examples?
So maybe just assuming that one person represents an entire group, maybe assuming a certain way that treatment should go or treatment pathway that a person should choose or shouldn't. Things like that are very common in communities.
Okay. And who's attending these events?
So people from the communities have been invited, representatives from all across the board. The idea is to get people from different perspectives to be able to have an opportunity to speak with each other and hear other people's perspectives and things like that.
Okay. All righty. Is there anything else you want folks to know about what's going on?
Just that we would love for more people to be engaged in the community and get to know some of the people here and be a part of the community and be more open to different ideas and different perspectives.
Okay.
Yeah, so I facilitate a community conversation on opioid use disorder in rural communities. And then when I'm working in communities, I also facilitate a train the trainer so that people who are cross-section can understand what stigma is and the impact of stigma, and really we talk to one another, right? So it's not a workshop of talking at, but rather talking with and sharing experiences. And then after I've done a few of these workshops, we do a train the trainer so that when I leave, people in the community can then facilitate the workshops in the community.
Okay. So how much time are you spending in our region, and where have you been so far?
Okay. Oh my gosh, that's a challenge. Okay, so I will be here the whole week. So I have been to Marion. Where did I go from Marion? Yesterday. Where were we yesterday afternoon?
Johnson County.
Oh, Marion, Johnson County. So Smith County, Johnson County. Will be here today, and then I'm going to go to Greenville. Then I'm going to end in Sullivan County. I got a whole list.
Okay. Well, I know
I'm driving a lot.
Here's the question that you asked, and I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
What do you hope people take away from your presentation and this whole program?
Yeah. I hope that people will learn from one another. I think that the power in healing in communities and the power of communities is for us to talk to one another and to share stories, because I don't know what other people's experiences are unless they've told me and unless I've given them the grace to tell me. And so that's really what I hope, is that we'll learn to listen to one another, we'll learn to share with one another, and really give each other grace to make our communities better and to support people who are seeking recovery.
Okay. And the people that you target with this program are health professionals who deal directly with
everybody. So I've had
addiction.
Police, EMS, clergy, teachers, healthcare providers. So always a cross section of the community. I've had kids. I like teenagers.
Ah, okay. All right.
All right. Well, I want to say good morning and welcome. And I'm so happy to be here. I'm Heather Cobb, and I'm a consultant to UR Medicine, which is University of Rochester. You can tell by my accent, I am not from here. But if I say I'm from New York, everyone says, oh, I love Manhattan. And then I say, drive 7.5, 8 hours north, and that's where I live. So I like to say I come from rural America, and I go to rural America. And so I work in the Recovery Center of Excellence, and I facilitate what we're doing today called the Community Conversation on Opioid Use Disorder. And then tomorrow we're actually going to be doing a train the trainer so that any of you who want to be facilitators in the community can do that. I'll tell you more about myself, but I'm going to make an assumption you don't all know one another. Is that a good assumption? Okay, well why don't we do this? Let's start by introductions because it's such a small group. And go ahead and tell us who you are, where you work, all that.
My name is Casey Caudell, and I'm the Northeast Regional Coordinator for the Mental Health Association of East Tennessee.
Oh, wonderful, thank you.
My name is Jennifer Jones, and I'm a certified peer recovery specialist, and I work as the lead community navigator for Valley Health's peer health program.
Wonderful,
I'm Carolyn Blizzard, and I am a community health navigator for Valley Health.
beautiful.
Elena Johnson, I also work with Peer Health and I'm a community navigator.
I'm Renee Crane, I'm the office supervisor at the Rogersville Health Department.
Wonderful.
Hannah Hunter, I'm the nursing supervisor at the Rogersville Health Department.
This is like our Rogers World Health.
Yeah.
You're in the house.
Yeah.
Sean Street, I'm the county health director for both Hawkins and Hancock counties.
Wonderful, all right, thank you.
I'm Rochelle. I'm a counselor at Over Mountain Recovery, but also doing my psychology externship there and working on my doctoral degree at ETSU in clinical psychology.
Oh, wonderful. And
I'm Jeff Bobo with the Rogersville Review.
Jeff with a J or Jeff with a G?
Jeff with a J.
All right, I have a brother who's a Jeff with a G, so
Yep.
I always ask. I've been working with UR for over a year, and what we're going to be doing today is a workshop that when I started, the artist Charmaine had already been in 2 communities in Kentucky, and so we're going to be using the artwork from that and 2 interviews from her portraiture. So she sits with people, she paints portraits, and then she has conversations. So today, no role playing, take a deep breath. But we are going to be talking to one another because today we're really talking about and thinking about stigma and what that means in our communities and how it's not just that we're going to have an academic conversation about stigma, but rather how do we communicate with people in our communities? How do we talk to one another so that people really understand what stigma is and how to address it, and also really positive stories about recovery. So today we're really going to kind of talk about our thoughts, why we have those thoughts, where they are, kind of where do we learn things in our experiences, because in order to really, I think, tackle stigma in our community, we have to have conversations. That's really the root of it. So instead of talking at, really talking with. So again, today we're going to have some video and conversation, and we'll do a couple of other sort of activities. But again, nobody's put on the spot. It really is just a relaxed conversation with one another, and hopefully we'll really learn from one another. I know yesterday, so I started, just so you know, I flew in to the Tri-City Airport. You guys, that's a metropolis compared to the little airport where I came from, which has 1 flight a day. You know, I can flap my wings on that airline. So this week I'll have 2 workshops every day, and then tomorrow morning and afternoon, and then a train-the-trainer. So I'm going between Virginia and Tennessee this week, and so we're really packing it in. It's really beautiful. I'm actually seeing a lot of the country here. You know? It's gorgeous. It's really beautiful. Okay, so we're going to start with a video. And this is a video from Huntington, Kentucky. So what we'll do is we'll watch the video, and then we'll have a conversation about sort of what you've observed or kind of what we might learn or where we might go in the conversation with the people who are being interviewed. So it's just about 4 minutes.
I could not have no one to remind us. When the board is, about 3.5, well, counting 2 months in jail, it took me that long to get my mind back right forever. You know, the prayer Lord style, just where I could actually reach over and take the program very serious, you know. It's not working for me. No. Yeah, I got to take a taser that she don't want to go back to it. Unforgivable experience, people. No doubt.
I had a best friend in Nashville. We lived down the street from each other, And I kind of would always, when I would get back to going down there, that's who I would make up with first. Me and I really had 3 best friends, but me and him would always end up going back to the opiates, you know, and stuff like that. So this time,
Best friend girl now. Do you have any contact, or can you have any contacts, or is it just
he's
still?
dead, unfortunately. So he said, other
How did you evolve this?
yeah, that's, I had a couple of years ago. So,
I'm sorry.
It's okay, you know, it's not okay, but it's, I've dealt with it, you know, best I can.
Oh, is his name?
James. Told him I loved him every time before I got off the phone. You know, we had each other's best man, you know, our wedding, our kids have been broken, that kind of stuff, you know.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I got married at a young age when I was like 16, and I went through trauma from the time I was 5 to like 13. I had to take trauma therapy, but I got married at an early age to like a dealer. So I kind of started using to make myself numb for people. I started doing drugs, so I would be numb, so I wouldn't feel nothing about my trauma or things I went through. And I just, all of that, I did a lot of art. And that's really what saved my life, was my art.
Okay. All right, so we are just seeing a really small snippet of a much larger conversation, right? So if you were painting a portrait or having a conversation with each person, is there anything that you feel you would have liked to ask Philip or Ben or Melissa? What are some of the opportunities for conversation or learning?
I would like to know more about her art.
Yeah, me too. Like, what is it that she does? Because that seems like a special connection.
And also, like, is that a way you can also support yourself financially? You know,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sort of learning more about smart recovery and about having hobbies and doing different things like that. It came up recently in a workshop, and I was like, oh, I don't really know a lot about that. And I was thinking about that in terms of we're whole people and really discovering the wholeness of who we are. I'm seeing nodding heads. Okay. Did you want to add? Does anyone want to add anything?
I think the uniqueness for us is the fact that we live in Appalachia. And that's unique, you know, as a subpopulation for us and the culture, whether it's from Georgia to New York. What does that look like, and what are the similarities between these folks, and maybe in their background or upbringing and those type of things, and see, you know, triggers and those type of things that may be similar between these three.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing because when you say to New York, it's so funny being from New York, because I said when I say New York, but I live in northern New York, which is really similar to here. It's similar sort of geographically hill-wise, but also poverty and just rural America, right? Transportation and, you know, gosh, we could go down the list of all of those things, right? But so it's really an interesting thing because there are unique things happening and what's happening for them because they're from one community. And so each community sort of has unique things in it. But also I think rural America is unique, right? Or we have special barriers to access to health care and all of that. What else?
I sort of hear what you're saying though, like this specific region also has art like aspects that are unique, like storytelling, for example. Like our clients like might resonate a lot with that, like through their recovery, or like religion, which is not necessarily based in art, but like those similarities. that could be unique to this area.
Yeah.
Also.
But the religion, you know, is an influence whether it's perceived as good or bad, especially in these circumstances, and even for the rural mountain south, what a role religion plays in so many people's lives.
Yeah.
And something that turns them off, or is a source of comfort, and they recognize that maybe from how they've been brought up, or their experience and those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. What else?
It's the generational change from these, all the media that this younger generation has grew up with. I think it separated them from spirituality a lot. But I had a faith-based recovery, 100%. I didn't go to meetings. It was just all Jesus. And I don't know, had I been somewhere else, that might not have been.
Accessible even.
Yeah.
Like I'm from like the Maryland, DC area. That comes up way less often than here.
My upbringing for one, and then that, you know, I mean, I don't even know, do jails in Maryland have chaplains? I don't know.
If they did, I didn't like. Yeah, I
Yeah.
volunteered in jails, and it was they weren't as accessible.
Yeah, I know in New York, different faith chaplains actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think also AA is faith-based. I mean, there isn't, when you said Jesus, it's really that higher power, right? So faith is for belief in a higher power, but you're right about, and this is sort of different paths. I mean, they're looking back. You know, my question is, where are you now and going forward, right? We don't know if Ben, the loss of his friend, where was he in his recovery? You know?
Recovery was lost.
Yeah, which brings us really to the next question, and that is loss and grief come up in the video, but death isn't the only loss. What other losses do people with OUD experience?
Pride for one. Children, jobs, family members.
I think we lose our whole identity. You know, we've come to a point in our lives where we don't know who we are anymore. And the person that we are, we don't like that person. And that kind of perpetuates that feeling of wanting to change eventually, I think, once you have enough of that. But there's so many things that a person loses when they're in active addiction. But I lost my entire identity. I didn't even know who I was. And in my recovery, it was a big part of my recovery, was learning who I was, really.
Yeah.
Scientifically, we do lose ourselves. We change our person. It changes our personality.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I think about when I'm in the community, and of course we're addressing stigma, is a lot of people think about all of the losses while someone is in active addiction. But we don't know if in the case like Melissa or any of these folks, did they lose their community or family to seek recovery? And especially when we're talking about housing and all of those kinds of things, it may be that somebody is really most at risk. You know, and yesterday we were talking about leaving jail, and you know, why would you go back to your family? But if that's your home and you have no other place, what are your choices, right? So this is a really vulnerable time, but we don't always have something set up, you know, in our communities for that sort of transition time. Any other thoughts on that, or anything you want to add?
Yeah, that one thing in particular is a really big disparity that we have, particularly in this area. Many times people come out of jail and know that if they return to their previous home, that there are going to be things there that are not good for them, good for their recovery. And because there is no option here for sober living or some kind of safe housing, some kind of program like that where they can be in a safe environment, they end up going back to that home, and then they end up falling back into those old things.
Yeah.
It's one of those things too where also on the other side of things, a lot of times people won't pursue recovery because they can't leave their families. They don't want to go away or leave their kids or leave their mom. And a lot of times I feel like, based on my experiences with the clients that I've worked with, a lot of times people stay in their active addiction because they don't want to leave their family. They don't want to leave their, what they're used to, because there are no options here for the most part as far as like long-term recovery. So they're having to go to, at least, another city or, another state sometimes to find recovery options for themselves. And they don't want to leave. They're not ready to step out of that yet.
And I think you and I were talking about this yesterday. You also just said the financial. If somebody, this sort of assumption that if you're in addiction, you're not working. But for some people, they're working, they're living their lives, and things might be unraveling. But if they can maintain feeding their kids and family.
Yeah, absolutely. I have multiple clients that have actually chosen not to pursue treatment because they were the sole supporter of their home. And so they couldn't take off work. There wasn't an option there. There was just no other option in their eyes for them to go anywhere because their wife, their kids, their, whoever it may have been, they depended on them to keep a roof over their head, food on the table, and they had to make a choice between pursuing recovery and being able to keep the lights on at home, keep a home at all, So often people, they're forced to make that choice.
Yeah.
I think in regards to community, for all of us, there's this disconnect. I've said for years, two of the worst things they created was television and air conditioning. It drove us inside. You don't know your neighbors. Now that's all been compounded by social media to the nth degree. And so many people that are even good, productive citizens are so disconnected because they work in one community, they live in one community, they go to church in another. That's for me. I mean, for years I've worked in Johnson City, and then I live in Churchill, this Hawkins County, but I worship in Kingsport. So I laid my head down pretty much in Hawkins County where I live, but that's about my extent of my relationship to the community. Even more so for people in these situations that are just automatically or already going to be disconnected. And then they rely on social media as a way to connect to something, one way or the other. They belong to people who's actually on their street or in their area.
Yeah. And you bring up that if we know one another, then that's when, right? I mean, we know that our neighbors, an older person fell and we're there, or we had a fire and we're all there. I mean, that's sort of, it's interesting because to me the beauty of rural America is that we are there when someone's hurting. I don't know if you have this, but we have like sometimes jars, we have jamborees, somebody has a motorcycle accident or something, right? And we raise money. So we rally around supporting one another. But also, in a rural place, you can't recreate yourself. So, as you're driving around, maybe your family name, and how people feel about your family and your history, and that may be a burden. It's an interesting challenge that I think that we have.
That's a bit two-sided as well, because I grew up in Russell County, Virginia, and people saw my demise, yet they saw me come out of the ashes and do something different.
Yeah.
And which was great there, but then I moved to North Carolina where no one knew me. And if you say, yeah, I've been to prison, I had, have distribution charges for drugs, I wouldn't let my kid go over to that person's house. So it's two sides to that as well.
So Melissa talks about trauma and what's the impact of trauma on addiction, or does our understanding of trauma open doors for us towards empathy? Anybody have thoughts with regard to trauma? Anything you want to think about there?
I feel like trauma is the gateway drug for a lot of people. It was for me. And if you actually look at the statistics and the scientific studies that have been completed over the years, there is so much evidence to suggest that trauma is one of the leading reasons behind people resorting to a substance in order to cope with whatever it may be. And trauma can affect so many other things. I love Dr. Gabor Mate's work. He has worked, he's from Canada, and he has worked with the downtown east side patients there in Vancouver, which is probably one of the highest areas for active drug use anywhere. And he, worked with these people for years, just getting down with them where they were, asking them questions about their backgrounds and the things that they had experienced. And there's a video on YouTube where he talks about how each and every person that he worked with for I think it was a certain amount of months, the females that were addicted to heroin, every single one of them had experienced a sexual assault trauma when they were children. And if you think about, all like early childhood development, the prefrontal cortex doesn't even fully go online until much, much later in a person's life. The development is still ongoing. So as children, if we're exposed to certain traumas, our brain develops around that. And so it's very hard to pull back away from that and unlearn those things and to learn to cope in different ways. And one could even look at it from not even just addiction to substance, but things like autoimmune conditions, ADHD, things like that. There's a big argument often that they're actually responses to trauma. And I believe that there's some weight in that. For me, trauma is something that continuously perpetuates those things, because even though a person might stop using drugs, that's only the beginning of it. Until one learns to heal, to cope in different ways, there's a whole lot more that comes with recovery that one has to go through in order to get to where they want to. And it's a continuous thing. It's not something like, oh, I went to a 28-day program, I'm good now, I should be on the right path from here on out. It doesn't work like that. I mean, I've been in recovery for 15 years, and it's still a daily thing that I have to work on. My mental health, I have to keep it in check. So for me, trauma is one of the biggest things that really needs to be paid more attention to, because we really don't know, like passing by someone on the sidewalk or in the store, what all that person has experienced in their life. And it's easy for us to stigmatize or pass judgment on people, but really, we really don't know what that person has gone through.
Yeah.
And for us in public health, we've had this creating awareness, throughout the department and what is public health, and looking at opportunities and learning more about ACEs and trauma-informed care.
Yeah.
Knowing that, this creates that awareness, knowing what have our patients experienced that are coming into our facilities. We see many children who come in for the WIC program, but we also see adults in our family planning clinics and in our primary care clinics, where we see underinsured and uninsured adults knowing they've had these traumas, or they've had these ACEs, and our realization that create that awareness of how we can better serve them.
Yeah.
In that role, where we feel a niche in serving certain populations, in our own community.
Yeah. Even using those words, trauma-informed care and ACEs, and we've come so far. So I have 9. I'm a biological child, so an adoptive family. You say biological or adoptive. I have 9 adopted siblings, and my parents started a foster care agency when I was in middle school. And I'm a product of the 70s. I'm in my 50s. And so I look back, and I know for my parents, it was that time where we just loved them. And in fact, I was just talking to somebody who does a lot of work with foster parents, and sometimes foster parents say, I'm going to love this child and I'm going to heal them. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to take a minute here. But I look back at all of my siblings, and if we were to go to each one, to the person, and even in our family, like I grew up in that situation, just the chaos and mayhem, like all of that. I can look back and go, holy Toledo, my parents just really did not know, right? And so I think we're so much farther ahead than we know so much more than we did, and yet, I really hope that we'll get more, like again, it's that research, it's the education, it's the communication, it's like learning. We're constantly on this learning path.
I think just using the language, to your point, just using that kind of language, it prompts a person to, if they don't know what ACEs are, or if they don't know what trauma-informed care is, it kind of creates an awareness just in itself by speaking it. And a lot of people will ask, well, what does that mean? What is that? How does that, pertain to what we're talking about? So I think just using that language and, that it really, it helps.
I was doing a workshop actually in Kentucky. It was in Ohio. And a mother brought her daughter and then her daughter's friend, and they had a high school sort of peer program. And we were talking, we brought up trauma, and he said, what's trauma? So we ended up having a really nice long talk about what is trauma, and just understanding. So I think, again, why are we doing this? So I want you to know that every group and every workshop is different because everybody's different in the workshop. I was just in Nogales, in Arizona, and there was, the head of public safety and EMS and fire and, just educators. I mean, it was just and lots of people in recovery. So every workshop is really different. And so for those of you who are going to do the train the trainer tomorrow, who's going to go to that? Anybody? Okay. So I'm just going to take a moment just to say, as you're facilitating, right, whoever's in the room will share. So if I field these questions in a different room of people, we're going to hear different answers, right? And that's what we want. Yeah.
I think to answer the question, the last question there, I think yes, absolutely, understanding trauma does open the door toward the empathy. I think too, like the stigma in this area is that, people wake up one day and decide that they're going to choose this path. And I think really, once you really delve into things and look at people's past and look and see what that trauma is that they had in the past, that you'll see that really affected. And I think people are more empathetic when they look at the whole picture, look at what these ACEs and the trauma that they experienced in the past, that they realize that, hey, they just didn't wake up one day. They're just so quick to those judgments to say, okay, this is the path that they've chosen and taken, and it's like sometimes it's hard to deviate from those paths, but they never really, as she mentioned, got to the core of that core problem that caused the trauma. And I think a lot of people would be more interested.
Which is why we have to have these share stories, right? And part of stigma is pushing people into the shadows, and what we have to say. There's a saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Right? So if we just open that up, open the conversation up, then we can really start to have that understanding.
There was a workshop that a coworker of mine was telling me about yesterday, and she was leading mostly surrounding mental health conditions, including substance use disorder, but it was with a group of a construction company agency, and she said that somebody in the workshop was like, oh, it's like a house. And everyone kind of looked and said, wait, what? But it was the fact that, yes, in a house you have walls, right? You have rooms. And when you're building a house, you put up those walls, right? So whoever is building that house, that community that you're in, they're the ones that are putting up the walls. And this guy was like, but we have the opportunity to go in and put in some doors, right? So I'm reading opening doors for us toward empathy. Yeah. We are the ones in the community. We are the ones that are able to open those doors, but then take it a step further and just knock down the wall, create an open floor plan. And it was such a neat analogy. And I think it fits in right here, right? To understand that trauma, you do have to knock down those walls. You've got to open those doors. And I think understanding trauma does kind of introduce us to that empathetic.
I like that visualization. I like the construction guys.
Go into the pods in jail and do some individuals up for the reentry program, and we did the ACEs, and I explained a little bit about what that is. So for the incarcerated individuals to even understand it just the tiniest bit, I think helped them to be a little more sympathetic to themselves.
Yeah.
But it would break my heart seeing
Yeah.
there were,
Yeah.
guys that they're just broken children.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was teaching a class once in a men's rehab facility, and it just started with one guy who was bold enough in that environment, because naturally when you get a bunch of people in a room, a lot of which you don't know, having a hard conversation sometimes is a little bit more difficult, but the subject matter that we were on, it was a smart recovery class. We were kind of talking about our past and our backgrounds and maybe where we came from and where we grew up and what things we had experienced. And this one young man was bold enough to share something that was very difficult, I'm sure, for him to share, especially in that setting. But it kind of like started a domino effect. And before you knew it, it went through the entire room, and like they were, people were very emotional, and they were sharing things and realizing that there were things that they had very similar. And looking at them, they looked very different pathways, different walks of life, but they were actually realizing that they had a lot in common. And that was probably one of the most impactful classes that I've ever been a part of. And it just started with that one person sharing what he had been through, and then a person on the other side of the room who was completely different than this man was like, that happened to me too. I'm really sorry, because I know what that feels like. And before you knew it, the entire room was like, some of them were hugging each other, and there were tears, and I think that every one of those young men walked out of that room that day different, because they started to understand the differences and the similarities between them.
They're not alone.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when we don't talk about it, it just feels like you're the only one who has that happen. Yeah. All right. Welcome. Hi. I'm Tetra.
Sheldon Livesey. I work with the minister here in Hawkinson, Hancock County.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the back of the room. So we'll go back here. And so what we're going to do is I put up a statement, and if you strongly agree, you'll walk over here. If you're somewhere in the middle, you'll be in the middle, and if you strongly disagree, you'll be over here, okay? So go wherever it is that you're, I'm going to be over here because I got to keep doing my... Yesterday I was in church and there was a guy, Blake, who was up there, and I said, Blake, and he was my slide. I was like, oh, I bet that's fancy. I felt so special. Okay, so opioid use disorder is a medical illness like diabetes, arthritis, and heart disease. If you strongly agree, come on over here. If you're somewhere in the middle, be in the middle, and if you strongly disagree, come on over here. Opioid use disorder. Sometimes we'll use opioid use disorder, substance use disorder, and sometimes alcohol use disorder. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Now, let's talk with one another. What are you thinking?
I find it very difficult to classify opioid use disorder to a likeness of things like diabetes, arthritis, and heart disease. Not that there isn't any likeness at all, but if you go to a doctor and you say, hey, I feel like I have arthritis, or I feel like there may be some issues with my heart, you get a completely different response than you do if you go in and say, hey, I'm addicted to painkillers, I need help.
So in this case, you're saying on the medical side, if we treat it differently.
Yeah, we very much treat it differently.
All right.
That's our reason for difference.
Okay. So now I see nodding heads over here.
Yeah, I like that explanation. I think that's great. I don't think you're wrong. You know what I mean? I would say when we go into schools and we talk to middle schoolers and high schoolers about mental health conditions, about substance use, disorders, and we tell them that your mental health is your physical health, and your physical health is your mental health.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm over here, because
Yeah.
I see this and I'm like, well, of course it's an illness. Like you have to take care of yourselves, and you have to go to the doctor, or you have to go and see somebody, or you have to take some kind of medication, or on the flip side, not, right? So I could see both ways.
Yeah, so it's interesting, we might classify it, even insurance, right? Legally, we are supposed to, I mean, health parity laws, but we don't with insurance. So you're right, it's like, that's not supposed to happen, but it does happen. So, okay, so think about it in terms of illness. Anybody else want to say, because I have a couple people over here in terms of illness and what you might be thinking?
I would just say, like, from a clinical standpoint, you think of some of the, the brain receptors, and there's also, links to could it be genetically disposition, not taking the environment. So I would say for those reasons that it should be treated as a medical, like she says, not always is, but I would say that there is medically, clinically, scientific evidence that leans for it being a disease or condition, just like diabetes, heart disease, things like that.
Right.
And not just like, I think for so many people, to help break down that stereotype, you've got to put it in this type of language so they understand it. Someone who's diabetic and is not taking their medicine correctly, it's not eating what they should, we would not treat them as an outcast and say, well, if you're doing what you need to do as far as your diabetes, then this will be the case. Or maybe the case of someone who's, with OUD is automatically, well, let's treat them as an outcast.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
So again, it's how we sort of look at the illness or disease in a different way, morally, socially. Do you want to add anything else? Anybody else?
From a recovering addict's point of view, it's something that requires a daily maintenance. It is an absolute daily maintenance, just like diabetes. You have to test your sugar, and you have to do this.
Yeah.
So from my point of view, it is something I have to take care of daily.
Yeah, a chronic disease management.
Yes.
It would be
chronic management.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a daughter who's 24, and she had her first back surgery at 17. She has a degenerative disc disease. And so from 17, she's had 3 surgeries. She just had her second surgery. And she has been on opioids now for 3 different surgeries and hates them.
Yeah.
She is sick. She feels agitated. She's already has anxiety, so it really exacerbates her anxiety. And I really, through a lot of this work and meeting so many people and other individuals and parents and, just understanding that for some people, for some moms that I've met who said, my child broke a leg and from jump they were addicted. They just loved it. Who knows what else was going on? I've had other people who just said, I was in high school and people drank and other people walked away and they could stop drinking, but I couldn't stop drinking. And then once there was pot, I couldn't stop that. And once there were Percocet, I was like, oh my God, I found the drug that I've been looking for my whole life to make me feel normal. And I'm going to use that word, feeling great, feeling normal. So I just think, what is it? And this gets to, there's our brains, we're learning more about the brain, we have more evidence, and the more we understand, sort of, maybe then the more treatment will change, right? Attitudes and treatment. Anything else? Any other thoughts, Wally?
I'm kind of neutral. I know that it is a medical illness, the changing of the brain, but it's also a mental health issue, like we just discussed about trauma. Most of the time, there's plenty of people that don't have trauma who become addicted to opiates because they're so addicted.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would kind of come back at that and saying I feel like everyone has some kind of trauma, and we think about trauma often as things like abuse, sexual assault, things like that. But sometimes trauma from a childhood can be just simply having parents that aren't present, that aren't engaged with their children, not feeling like you're heard or that you're important to people. Growing up while your brain is developing, I feel like everyone has some kind of trauma somewhere. And a lot of people, until you actually have it in front of you and kind of like set out and laid out in detail, like this is trauma, this is a response to trauma, I think a lot of people just don't realize what trauma is, like the different facets of it.
Yeah. Not having enough food, not
Yeah.
having clothing.
middle
for
school.
Yeah, yeah.
For the love, you know.
I see the 3 items up there as physiological items that are medically treatable physiologically. They deal with my body, the way my body works, the organs and cells, and the structure of that. But addiction, whether it's opioid addiction or any type of addiction, that's a neurological type of change in the way the brain structure is. Normally, because somebody's given over to whatever is the prompting for the addictor. But you have to treat that differently because you go back psychologically and you're looking for the root of what was the cause, but the treatment, most anybody in opioid addiction will tell you it takes a year-long facility stay to even begin to work. But even at that, the neurological or the symptomatic for opioids, they can come back. You can be in the presence of somebody that you ran with 3 years ago or 5 years ago, and you've not touched anything, and it brings back that same desire, just like the day that you walked away from it. So it's entirely different, and unless you treat it differently, you won't see good results, I would believe.
Yeah, wow, this is great. You guys are
saying,
okay.
Smell Oxycontin on people. After I came home from prison and was clean, I could smell Oxycontin on people.
You're like the sniffer doggies, those
I have
dogs
a
that
very
can smell.
smell.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think to Sheldon's point, something else that I thought of when he was talking was, you know, the different, those neuroreceptors that are there in certain individuals and they're not there in others. And then if you've ever heard of like hedonic tone, that's a very relevant thing for people that have substance use disorder or addiction. That neuropathway is a little bit different because if you do brain scans, people that are, you can almost pick out pretty much the people that are going to have issues with addiction. And addiction may be gambling, it may be a sex addiction, it may be Oxycontin or methamphetamine. All across the board, there's going to be a void there that person is going to feel like the brain scan will show, their neuroreceptors will light up.
Mm.
So hedonic tone was something that I didn't know anything about until about 3 years ago. And it's very relevant in people that have some kind of addiction.
Yeah. All right, wow. Great. Now let's think about this. If we've got another 25 people in this room, right? Where will everybody be and the conversation? Because this is what we want. We want to make sure, you know, that we are having these conversations and getting everybody in the room and making sure. This is what's really important. Is it doesn't matter where you are in the room. What matters is that we're talking in the room, right? So, okay. People with opioid use disorder should be able to stop using opioids on their own. Strongly agree, somewhere in the middle, strongly disagree. People with opioid use disorder or substance use disorder should be able to stop using opioids on their own. All right, you guys are just holding up the wall. Okay, what are you thinking?
I would say, like, that, as we've already mentioned, like, it takes a whole support system. So, like, if you, like we talked about earlier, leaving the jail setting, coming back to the home setting, if you don't have that support system, I mean, you could have a determination, and not saying people don't do it on their own, but I think it takes an environment.
Yeah.
And the right environment and everything.
Yeah. I made this question on purpose a little bit provocative. What is the problem to anybody with this question?
Should.
Yes, the word should. Why is it a problem?
Because I don't think that is the expectation, but it's not fair to like not recognize that people can't do it on their own.
Yeah. Yeah, that word should is just, I should stop eating cookies. Like, I mean, like, there's a lot of things we should do, right? And so when we say you should be able to just quit, when we hear people, and sometimes our loved ones will say, you should be, or my daughter should be able to quit. Sometimes they're saying that because they're desperate, they're hurting, but We're not. I want us to be really conscientious of where that word should comes from and the pain that it can really cause and the blocking of the path toward recovery for people.
And it's ignorance and inexperience.
Yeah.
This comes up a lot at a methadone and Suboxone clinic too, like prescribing that medication means now they should be able to stop. You know? And I don't mean to say they, but yeah, prescribing that means, yeah.
That's really, you're the first person who's brought that up, that while someone's in, seeking treatment, medication for OUD, that should be enough.
Like with the right dose.
Yeah.
That's.
Which doesn't get us to all the other stuff going on, right? You've talked about all the other important things about treatment and dealing with all the other stuff. Wow, that's really good. I'm going to think about that.
Yeah, and I agree with that wholeheartedly because you often see people that come through a program and they may be on medication-assisted treatment. They may be enrolled in a program. They may be doing all of the right things. And then there's just that maybe one or two components there that they haven't really addressed yet. Maybe they have some kind of trauma and they're having nightmares or something else that's, there's like polysubstance use disorder, where people are using multiple things. Or if you look at, start talking about people that are IV users, a lot of times it's not even about the substance, it's about the behavior. So they get addicted to the needle.
Right.
So there's all of those different components. I hear the same thing a lot. Well they're on MAT, so they should be able to go fine now with the right dose. Or they've been on MAT for 2 years now. They should be able to come off by now. We can't do. Everybody's different. There's uniqueness there.
Working in public health, for decades, our message around tobacco use. We have certainly been proponents of don't use tobacco, cessation, and those type of things. But standing here in 2022, I realize that a cigarette today does not look like a cigarette 50 years ago. There's a reason why there's chemists in tobacco companies. It's all about precision, exactly what that person needs to get that just for tobacco use.
Well, I mean, let's be real about Juul and what's happening, and now with all of that, and kids are starting at, targeting children and just the addictiveness of that.
And so we want to be sympathetic, especially when we're encouraging our parents that are coming through our clinics and tobacco cessation and maybe we need tobacco-free program. We're encouraging expectant mothers to stop using tobacco, while they're pregnant. But it's hard. My dad gave up smoking in 1973, long before I was born. He was at 4 packs a day, and we had cold turkey. Just said, for him it was spiritual. Lord, please take this away from me.
And he's an outlier,
and he's never had any, not even the first use of that. But I realized that cigarette he was using in 1973 did not look like a cigarette in 2022. And so we're encouraging people to recognize, there's thousands of chemicals in that cigarette. And those type of things, I live well with these type of things with OUD.
Yeah. All right. And I think you've talked about this on your own. I want you to know, I made this question because I want people to talk about it, right? I don't want to get in trouble if you're like, wow, who made that? I did. I'm in trouble. Okay. The next thing is people who have recovered from OUD still can't be trusted. Again, it's a provocative question. People with OUD still can't be trusted. Strongly agree, somewhere in the middle, strongly disagree. All right. Okay, what are we thinking?
Okay, for somebody that has an addiction, well, once you have recovered, you're really not that much being trust. For me, in my opinion, it was. That's the biggest thing. For my family to leave me in the house by myself with their wallet sitting out, that was a big moment. Wow, I've done something big here. My sister lived back in her house and I wasn't in love with her for years. That trust was the main component to my recovery life. All right, I don't lose this up again.
Yeah. So, and I put a word in there because recovered, you said recovery, recovering is a maintenance thing. So any thoughts about, I did throw in the word recovered, any thoughts about that?
It's an ongoing thing. I don't think you ever fully get recovered from anything. I mean, even if it's, you know, I don't know, an addiction to chocolate chip cookies, you know, or an affinity for that thing. Habits, if you think about it, you know, if you come in every day and you have, I don't know, a Coca-Cola out of the refrigerator as soon as you come home from work, and that's in your habit, like that's something that's kind of hard to, you know, but if you think about things like substance use disorder, we are ongoing. We're continually working. We're never like cured. We're never covered. You know, it's an ongoing maintenance that we have to keep up. Yeah. And I think I'm kind of in the middle because although I certainly agree with what Caroline said, and those things are really big for us when our parents start to trust us again, and you know, we start building those relationships with people that we've destroyed them, you know, during our active addiction. So I see that side of it, but I also see the side of if I'm a person, just a regular average person that doesn't know anything about addiction, that doesn't know anything about mental health or anything like that, from the outside looking in, sometimes it might be that I just don't want to maybe tempt that person. I don't want to put them in that position. So, you know, there's that side of it too. I wouldn't say that maybe they can't be trusted. I don't know that I would use that. But at the same time, sometimes I think back, there were times in my early recovery where I didn't trust myself.
Yeah.
So, you know, I have to kind of think about it from that point of view too.
Yeah.
I'm going to disagree. I am recovered, and I have been recovered for 15 years.
Yeah.
But it's different for everybody. But our language that we're required to use is recovery.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that are in recovery, and they will be in recovery for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
But it was like, I was healed from the disease.
Yeah. Yeah, so
And it's a rare thing, though.
Yeah.
But I do meet people along the way.
Yeah.
That I will never, there were no recovery communities. I came home from prison and slowly got my license, a job, a vehicle. It did take a while before my mom to let me drive her car. You know, she used to sleep with her car key pinned on the inside of her pajamas, pinned on the with her purse in her car. Like,
yeah.
You know, and she didn't want me to come to her house, but I mean, I could swim in this whole room full of Oxycontin and it wouldn't bother me. I've been, from almost the day I came home with my ex-husband now, I was around it. But it never bothered me. I don't, it's it. I'm recovered.
Yeah.
I don't throw that in space.
Yeah.
If we're going to have a acceptance of people that are recovering, then we need to have trainings to inform those that are in the support system around them.
Yeah.
Clearly, one of the things that we're missing, for instance, if you're an employee or a boss, you know, how much do you accept this person back? What are the parameters that you need to set up? What are signs that you need to be watching for? And a lot of people don't know that. And it allows people maybe to fall before they should.
Yeah.
And but family members have just like we talked about, they need to know what to watch for. And in a social setting, if you're working with somebody, it'd be the same if you have somebody that's been convicted as a pedophile. You know, at what point would you allow that person to begin to blend back in? And there's always going to be the parameters that need to be set and things to watch for, depending on, you know, it's just different types of illnesses, but this is one that is going to be major. You can have an employer can be taking a big chance to accept people into that place, and one really bad experience when they put up safeguards and they said no more. We allow that.
Yeah,
and
there's a lot of evidence, and there's a project, it's, you know, called Second Chance Hiring, and a lot of evidence on people in recovery who are really reliable, which gets us to trust in terms of, there are people I don't trust that have nothing to do with substances. So I think that's one thing, but I think you brought up sort of that, in some ways that opens up, you know, the opportunity for people who are in recovery that feeling of trust, being able, how do we expect people to be successful if we don't allow them to work, if we don't allow them to have good housing, or, all of those things, because that's so much part of rebuilding a life and having a life in a community. Trust is so very crucial.
Yeah, I agree with Sheldon. I feel like those parameters have to be set up, because I really don't like the word trusted, but there do have to be those the parameters put up around it, so a person knows what their expectations are. They know what they can do, because if you just assume a person and be like, oh, okay, well they've been off drugs for a year, they're good to go, and here's the keys to this building and all the access to whatever. If you don't tell that person, well, you can't have your friends here after hours, you can't do this, you can't do that, like setting up those guidelines for that person to go by, a lot of times they're not going to know what their boundaries are. Or, I think back to myself, it doesn't matter what it is. If there are boundaries set up somewhere, sometimes a person might make what one would identify as a mistake without even knowing that they were making a mistake. They may not have known that it was wrong or against policy or against the rules.
Yeah.
So,
which brings up sort of the importance of recovery housing and sober living. I know for my brother coming out of detox, having sober living and living with, there were rules in the house, and he became a house manager, and all of those things just helped him to sort of rebuild his life, really. I want to say one more thing about trust, and that is for family members. I know sometimes we family members have to be self-protective as well and say, I love you and I trust you, but especially early, it's like, that's why we have Al-Anon and we have support for family members, because I think that's really, important as well. And I hear that from family members. I love my mom, but I also know that I have been through this, and we know that sometimes it takes several tries before recovery is successful. Awesome. Okay, last question. Medications for opioid use disorder replace one addiction with another. Strongly agree, somewhere in the middle, and strongly disagree.
Right now.
Okay, well now we just have like this lineup. I don't know what this looks like on the TV there, but they're not in trouble. Okay, so what are we thinking? Medications replace one addiction with another. What are you thinking?
All right, from personal experience, not for myself, but with family members, with, what is it called? Okay, for instance, Suboxone. Yes, it can stop the use of opiates. Suboxone is also a pain medication that you don't go through withdrawals while you're taking it, but it's worse to come off of than the opiates itself. And you're stuck in it, and you can't get out of it. It deposits in your bones. To come off of it, it's like a year-long process of just excruciating crap. This is very close members of our family, and then you're just stuck in it. And you have to have it. And then it's expensive. And you have to go to the doctor. And then it holds you up from jobs. So for a very small period of time, possibly. I don't like it. Personal opinion.
Yeah, I think
personal,
that,
because they still snort it, they still shoot it, they still do whatever they want to do with it, because it is possible. And you get high because it is still a pain medication. There is, in Hawkins County, there is more Suboxone and Subutex users than there is opiate users, period. Opiates are kind of like gone out of here, but it's Suboxone and Subutex because it's still a pain medication and you still get high from it.
Yeah, so this sort of gets us to pill mills and what's happening with Suboxone, because, so if I were to rephrase this and say, under a doctor's medical supervision, used the right way, would it be?
No, because they prescribe you 2 a day.
And you get paid to do it.
And they get paid to do it.
All right, so that also gets us to, right, so that also then gets us to an issue. And this is really interesting in different communities, because that's not the case in every community.
Right.
We don't see that sort of Suboxone abuse in every community.
I wanted to get on. At the time, it was methadone,
Yeah, but methadone and Suboxone are actually different.
They are very different,
Yeah.
but it's before Suboxone really came out. It's something that's been around for a long time, but I didn't have transportation to go, but I wanted to go because it was only $10 a day instead of 80 to 300. You know, and I wouldn't be without, wouldn't have those times without. But I've watched people use it to get high. I've watched people buy off the street to try to stay clean. I've watched people use it properly, as it's designed, and not be nodding out all over the place during their day on Suboxone or methadone. Subutex, a lot of people, they want that so they can have other things as well. Suboxone, not so much.
So this sort of gets us to the net, and they normally prescribe it to pregnant women because it's water is what causes birth defects in babies, from my understanding.
So this sort of gets us to the idea of there still to be, and maybe you have other opinion, but then you're really talking about someone who's really still in active addiction. They're not in the process of recovery,
but they have a prescription for it and they're able to live.
But so are opioids. I mean, so is Percocet. So, I mean,
true.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah. So this is interesting. What? I'm curious over other thoughts.
I know just from my experience, I went to a lecture of a physician who presented how Suboxone is used in other countries. England is one of those, and the success they have had because it has been used the right way, and how people can have productive lives while using this as opposed to an opioid, and how do we get them back? And really, the programs, for instance, in Great Britain or England, where it was in the study, it was used as a maintenance line for diabetes or something like that. It's how this was being used, is how people were operating this program and being able to use that as the medication in order to get more productive and to be more administrative.
I look at it from a different perspective, and I used to be really, anybody that knows me knows that I used to be really anti-medication assisted treatment. However, after being introduced to doctors and clinicians that actually went about it the appropriate way, with programs invested and with the proper recovery tools being provided to that person, I've seen it be a harm reduction tool. Because while it's important and my recovery is very strongly faith-based, however, you can't show someone Jesus if they're dead. So I think, and I've had this experience with my clients that I've worked with, sometimes they just need a little bit more time. They may be going through a vulnerable ordeal in their life or whatever it may be. And if they choose to pursue a medication in the right way, work the program, do all the things that are requested of them, and they are able to work through that issue, it's, better than going back out on the street and buying what you think is, an Oxycontin or whatever, or, a Percocet, whatever it may be, that's actually not. It's been pressed with fentanyl, which is very common these days. Sometimes it just takes a little more time. Sometimes it's maintenance. Sometimes people are on it for long periods of time. And, if that's something that keeps them from going out onto the street and, getting something that may, cause an overdose and unfortunately, maybe die from that, I would much rather they go about it this way if it's done in the right setting.
And I think you bring up that whole, in terms of, we've talked about support, we've talked about, mental health counseling and other kinds of faith-based support. And I think the thing to me is so often we have sort of this, that there's a story of one person or other people who are using it, but that becomes the story. As opposed to, here are the success people. Here are people who've been on it for 5 years, they get their children back, their life back, they are off of it. I know one of a peer recovery person in Ohio said, I was on it for 5 years, got off, I was off, things were great, I had a serious crisis in my life, and I knew if I didn't get the support of Suboxone, mentally, that I was going to relapse. 2 years, she was on Suboxone, and now it's been years off. So I think that gets back to that sort of medical model of not abuse,
and not abuse from the medical system, but really rather just that different people have different pathways to recovery and to be successful.
And people's chemistry is different, their
Yeah.
receptors are different. If
Yeah.
you think about, you know, I'm a person with ADHD, so if I take a medication that normally would speed someone up,
Yeah.
it mellows me out.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, if you think about people, you know, I was addicted to opioids for 8.5 years. It hyped me up. I could take a pill and I could like run circles around town. So, you know, if a person has that different chemistry, they may not be getting that high. They just make you feel normal.
Yeah.
And, you know, for me, that's been a lot of the experience of the clients that I've worked with. It wasn't something where they, you know, were out of their mind or what, you know, nodding off and things like that. It just made them mellow enough and out and calm enough. You know, a lot of times the factor in anxiety disorders and depression and all these other things, it helps just kind of balance and level things out enough so that they can be productive, so that they do have an opportunity to be successful.
Yeah.
So there's that side of it too, the neural pathways of things, everybody's different.
Yeah.
If I understand it correctly, Suboxone is designed to give you that 2 years, which, you know, people are on it for different amounts of time, for your brain neural pathways to grow back properly, or with, you know, it does not affect their growth like opiates do.
Yeah, it's
so
different.
You know,
It is
then-
very different.
then
Yeah.
that kind of gives you a chance to be, I mean, obviously there's damage that maybe some will never go back right, but, you know.
But I think really to the point is not everybody's path is going to be exactly the same, right? You don't treat cancer exactly the same.
It's
so-
a wonderful thing
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
recovery.
Yeah.
It's like people making their own choices and designing their walk, you know, and as peer recovery specialists, we just walk with them and try to help them navigate out. I love it.
All right, have a seat. So, I think, you know, a lot of what we've been doing today is really just talking about experiences, and those experiences might be personal, they might be professional, they might be educational experiences, but all of our experiences are part of the learning process, and our goal really is to learn from one another in order to respond better and provide support. That's what we want. That's why we want to get people to keep coming to these workshops. We're focusing on recovery-oriented approaches to overcome stigma. So person-centered, self-directed, we've just been talking about that, right? Building on strengths and resilience of individuals and families and communities. And really, art sets the stage for that approach. We're talking about how we've used art in Nogales. I was in Nogales for a week. They did a whole bunch of these workshops. Murals are really big in that community, and they're painting several murals with students from high school, with some of their artists, as a follow-up to do this sort of community work. So I think that that's the sort of what, for us, that was our strategy of our work in communities, but every community has a different strategy. You know, you guys, I did notice one thing as I was driving, the barn quilt. We have barn quilts as well. We have a lot of folk art as well where I live. And I was thinking of, that was the first barn quilt I saw. And I was thinking, wow, barn quilt, that would be a really cool kind of thing, right? But anyway, so the art sometimes allows us to open doors in a different way. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna have you all work in different groups. Let's see. You had perception yesterday, right?
No, I had, what did I have yesterday?
I had prejudice. Okay, so you are going to have perception. Okay. Got sticky. You will have 2 people over here and then 2 people over here. You'll have prejudice. And you'll have stigma. Okay? And I'll get you markers. So what I'm going to have you do is really just brainstorm. I want you to think about these words And I want you to brainstorm, what do they mean? What is perception? Where does it come from? How do we see it? It can be perception writ large, just generally, that word perception in a neutral way, and also it can be perception about where do we go wrong with perception. Bias, where does bias come from? Where do we see it? How do we see it in our community? Prejudice. And then last, stigma. What are the things that we think about with stigma? Where does it come from? What does it look like? How do we face it? Anything that comes to your mind, just go right ahead. I'll give you a few minutes to brainstorm, and then we'll look at these and talk about them together. All right. Okay. So let's do this. We'll start with perception. I'm going to put this perception sort of over here. Can you see it? It's kind of dark. I'm trying to get where. I'm going to put it down here. Can you see it? Yeah. Okay. All right. Actually, this is a bit questionable, but okay. I don't know. Okay. Hopefully my computer will not die. Okay, so let's start with perception. These aren't in order here. We're going to start with perception. What were you guys thinking about with that word perception?
Well, it can be generational.
Yeah.
It can be limited. You don't know what you don't know, so your perception might be filtered by, or limited rather, by the things that you're aware of. Perception, we agree that it's like having a lot to do with our five senses. What you see, what you smell, what you hear, and your perception. That has a big effect on your perception.
Yeah.
Lack of awareness and education, of course. Or if you wanted to look at it from the other side of it, like an awareness of things, and being educated on things, as well as experiences, and the fact that perceptions are changeable. So it sets the stage for action and reaction. And the one thing that we kind of figured out about all of with perception compared to the others is it's the one that's not negative.
Yeah, so perception, like, if you all walk in and I immediately start talking, you're like, oh yeah, she's not from here. That's not, I mean, that could be, now you might say she's a Yankee, then we're moving on to the next thing, right? Then, it's not just perception, but rather there's something, okay, there's a judgment in there, there's something which gets us to then bias. But perception, we look at people, you're the first group that said five senses, because really, right, we think about places where we've been, and we think about how did they smell, did we love them, and other people go, I really didn't like it there, I was driving, and people were driving fast, and it's really hilly, and it was really scary, and as opposed to, wow, it was so beautiful, and the trees, and right? So we can walk out of a situation and feel really different about it from that sort of collective experience or individual experience. Awesome. Anybody else want to say anything about perception? Okay. Sometimes I like how you said something about, what did you say? You don't always know, because sometimes we do things. Yesterday, it's interesting because yesterday I couldn't get the computer started, and people were coming in, and I was feeling pretty stressed, and I was talking to this person, and I was trying to communicate, and we were not having a good time, and so people were watching us. And afterwards, I was like, oh, I think I might get arrested by the police. I was making a joke, and they were like, well, you did pretty well. And I was like, I didn't think I did very well. I thought I got kind of impatient with her. And so, our perception, how we feel about ourselves, how we feel like other people are looking at us is really sort of important. Okay, so let's move on to bias. What did y'all have for bias?
Well, religion. We can be biased. There's so many unconscious bias. I think all that stuff, it goes into unconscious bias.
What did you mean by unconscious bias?
You have a bias for something you don't even realize why, for a reason you don't even realize.
Yeah.
Whether it is your religion, your personal experiences, your regional culture, your family traditions, emotional, intellectual, media, financial, racial, and also visual, where you can judge people by, I guess that's more of a perception, but.
Well, we talk about that bias, and how people treat people. That is right. So so bias, as you're saying, is like we're starting to, either we may or may not know we're doing it. And I think as human beings, we like to say, I don't have any bias, like, I don't do that, or I don't think that. But if we were to take everybody's resumes and just take everybody's age off, any kind of gender, any kind of racial name, like history, ethnicity, then, and this is lots of research on this, then the person with the best resume percolates to the top all the time. But once we start adding all of those complexities of that culture that you've named, that's when things go awry. So we don't think we're doing it. Yeah. And then you said something about where it comes. Oh, you just said personal experiences and family cultures. So where does our bias, if we have just perception, where does bias come from?
One of the things is somebody can have a bad experience with someone that is an addict, and that creates their whole perception of all addicts, and they don't give them another chance. So you get an employer, and he's had a bad experience, he might not give anybody else a chance in his place.
Yes.
So
and that could be religion. It could be an experience that you had at a particular church or with a particular group of people, right?
We had someone on probation that was in the place where I work, came in my office to vacuum. The vacuum cleaner stopped, and I'm working with my back to the person, so I'm not paying attention. Took $300 out of my checkbook and it had $300 in it, and took it out of my coat pocket and was gone. That's happened to vacuum cleaner. Well, that really creates a bias.
Yeah.
In allowing people to come in an unsupervised capacity anywhere in what we do. And we should be the place that allows them to come. Is that what I'm saying?
Right, so now the question is, what do you do from that? Do you not hire anyone in the future because you've had a bad experience? Right. Okay, so biases, if we're thinking about this, biases start to get hard-baked, really, and then we move over to prejudice. What y'all have on prejudice? Notice I said y'all.
Yeah.
What did you? I'm teasing. What did you have under prejudice?
We thought that like it comes, it could originate from like family or social networks, and that a lot of that's learned behavior. If you're looking at like the definition itself of prejudice, is just preconceived judgment, like not making a assessment before you look at the whole picture.
Yeah.
Which is in itself stereotyping.
Yeah. Your perception can cause you to be biased or prejudiced. Yeah.
I think that all of these go together.
Yeah, they do. They're about. It's like a domino, right?
Yeah. It's just a clump. One goes to the next, to the next, to the next.
Amen,
It's
sister.
just the way.
Yeah. So once we have prejudice, right, it starts to get hard-baked, and then we've got stigma, which for you guys, what did you have?
We said it's negative thoughts and feelings. They can be stereotypes. It's a little bit different, but sort of similar. It's fed by misinformation. It's assumptions made from people, usually outside of the group, most often. And then it's a thought versus an action. And we put that because, like, we thought with prejudice, that might be seen more as actions than like stigma is more based in thoughts.
Yeah, so that's really interesting because when we think about stigma, we have there, if I sometimes do a workshop for medical staff, and I do it with a doctor because I can't give CMEs, or I can't give credits, I'm not a doctor, right? So, but she talks a lot about sort of the different kinds of stigma, like structural stigma, which is our legal system, our healthcare system, our insurance system, rehabs being only a certain number of days, or treatment facilities. So the stigma actually does get hard-baked into like structural stigma, that we are taking actions. They're part of maybe our laws, our policies, our procedures, that kind of thing. Self-stigma, how I feel about myself. And we talked about family stigma. The videos we were talked about Appalachia. When I was in Kentucky, and I was not in the original group that worked in Hyman and Prestonsburg, but I went back to Prestonsburg and facilitated a bunch of workshops. And I have to say, one person was so proud, she just said, I'm so proud that other people are seeing these videos and you're using them to help other people understand, because everybody else thinks we're the stupidest.
Okay. I have a right. You can have two people say the exact same thing. If they have a real country southern accent and someone else does not, they sound more intelligent. That's a bias I have.
Yeah.
Growing up in Appalachia.
Yeah.
Like I just have recently come to that conclusion.
Wow.
It's not something that's,
so it's like a hierarchy.
I suppose, I don't know. But it is, you know, how people look at southern Appalachia.
Which some gets you, some of what you said about TV and media and, you know, right? So we have somebody in, where was I recently? West Virginia. They were talking about some YouTube, something about a family in West Virginia.
They're inbred.
And that this whole documentary and they just, I was in that community and they just, the whole country's like laughing at thinking all of us are like that, right? And then what happens when somebody moves from that area, oh, you're from there, it's, it does become hard-baked, you know, it does become part of sort of our culture.
They're old, though. They're in their 60s and 70s, those.
Yeah, but still, you know, everybody else learning about it, right?
Well, I always say I'm from southwest part of Virginia. Southwest Virginia. I'm from the southwest part of Virginia. So I know that as well, even before that came out.
It's a little selfish, you know. Well, I always say if I walked in and I was talking like this and I said, hi, you guys, I'm from New York. I'm so happy to be here. It's really great.
Yankee.
That you would think, wow, when I say I'm from New York, I live on the Canadian, we're like, oh, that like softer accent.
So you pretended to have that city accent.
I just pretended to have a city accent. That sounds like you're I could do a Rochesterian accent, which sounds very Midwestern.
I would have never thought you were from New York because of that traditional city.
That's right? Because, you know, we watch Law and Order. Yeah. Right? So this is great because, as you said, right? You said it's like one tips the other, it's like a domino, and then we have stigma, and then how do we get back? You know, how do we undo that stigma that becomes part of our culture? You know, part of who we are, part of how we think about other people, part of how we're either communicating or not communicating with one another.
I think with stigma too, something that sticks out to me is, you know, as we were sitting up here talking a few minutes ago, you know, Helena and Caroline and I are very much cut from the same cloth when it comes to what we've experienced, but at the same time, a lot of times we hold those, I guess, kind of beliefs that, you know, just because we've all experienced addiction that we're all the same.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very much different. You know, we have different opinions, we've all had different experiences, although there are common factors, but at the same time, a lot of times we have those stigmas for ourselves and we project them on other people, and we just have this expectation that that's what they're going to be like. You know, coming, like for instance, the medication-assisted treatment thing. You know, one might assume that, oh, we're all from the same area, we all are in the same groups and things like that, that we believe, you know, the same things about that, but we don't, and it's okay. That's what, you know, I feel like embracing those differences, that diversity, is what makes a community actually come together and be more accepting, and not to hold those biases. But often I think that it starts with that self-stigma that we project on other people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was working with a community in Cherokee County in Oklahoma, and one of the people's a peer educator. He actually is running a RCOR, it's a federal HRSA grant, opioid grant, and he was working with police officers. and he had come through he had been in the local jail and stuff, and he said he felt like they were judging him. You know, he always felt like their eyes were on him, and it was because he was in jail. And he said, you know, to one of the people, I feel like your eyes are on me because I was in jail. And he said, no, it's because you have those back tattoos.
Yeah.
And so for them, they were looking at that saying, oh, that means something. My child, I have a child who had long hair, like long, short, long, blue, pink, makeup, you name it. And when Annie was growing their hair out, and I live in a rural place, there are no gangs, not one, there aren't gonna be, that Annie was not allowed to wear a bandana because they said that's gang wear. That's pretty uniform. Like, we're like, what? So we're like, okay, put a bar up in your head. Like, I don't like, all right. So I think it's a funny thing, right? We create these stories and we create that if you're wearing that, that's what that must mean. You know, it might not just be that your hair, when you go down, gets in your face, right? Okay. Anybody want to say anything before we move on? Any other thoughts? Okay, we're going to watch another video. This is from Prestonsburg. We'll watch it and then we'll have a conversation again, okay?
I'm a numbers person.
Yeah.
So I can tell you that our calls, drug-related calls, have increased about 26%.
Stop it.
No.
I didn't think you were going to say that.
No.
I thought that you'd say it's staying the same or going down or something.
No, it has increased.
Since when?
Probably over the last 24 months. We've seen the biggest increase so far. But like I said, I do them annually, so I don't want to do it around January. But so far through this year, we've seen a substantial increase.
You would think that overdosing would be like, okay, I'm done. It's just scary. You know, you wake up in the hospital, not know how you got there. But that wasn't even enough to make me quit. So like, it wasn't until like I had lost my mind, like 3 months later. Like,
What do you mean lost your mind?
I mean, I had a psychotic break. Like on the brink of insanity. Like no matter where I went, there I was, you know, like all of the traumas that I had kept in, like my whole life was starting to come out. Like I could see that visually, you know, and it was terrifying. It's probably the most terrifying thing I've ever went through in my entire life. So that was the thing that that really terrified me. I lost everything else up to that point, you know, the car, the house, the job, the kids, clothes, all that kind of stuff, except for what I had on my back. But the last thing that I lost was my mind.
So when I knocked on the door of the recovery center and said, if y'all won't let me in here, I'm gonna die. Because that's how I felt. And they said, well, I'm just quite worth it. You can just walk in, but we're gonna help you in every way we can. So I ended up entering the treatment center, and I was covered in scabies and lice and all that stuff, and didn't have a thing to my name, hadn't eaten in days, and that's when my second life began. So the person I was before just died away that day. It's kind of like I planted her in that cemetery that was across the street from the rehab and began a new life. So it's been quite a journey.
Someone had asked me, so you're not an addict anymore?
Right.
Yeah. And I said, oh, no, I'm an addict. I just don't use.
Yeah. That's right.
But that's the thing. I'm still an addict. It took me years, like in early recovery, I always identified myself in the meeting that, hey, I'm Sean, I'm an addict. But it took me almost 7 years to really, fully, 110% accept that that's what I am, not what I am, but who I am. So now I identify myself as, hey, I'm an addict named Sean, I'm an addict first, you know. But I had to do that through proving, I had to prove that to myself. Because of disease addiction, you know, the drugs is just what I get unmanageable behind the fastest. That's what takes me, down a very bad path very quickly, the quickest for that matter. But the disease addiction, it infiltrates and weaves itself into every part of my life.
There's a reason that your windshield is a heck of a lot bigger than your rearview mirror.
What is that reason?
So you can see what's in front of you. You already know what's behind you. It's not a big deal to check on it behind you. But you need to see a lot of what's in front of you.
Who told you that?
I came up on that one time. Somebody said something very similar to that. It just made a lot of sense to me. You just look over your shoulder for a glance. Look forward, because that's where your head's facing. Stand down on each of the car.
Okay. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this, but regarding the increase in drug-related calls, what are you seeing in your community? Are you seeing any changes? What's interesting is about a month ago, I really kind of started this big fall thing, right? I started in Nogales, and then I went to Maine for a week, and then in home, but was doing virtual training, and then here. And over the course of the last month, we're really seeing a lot on sort of rainbow fentanyl. And are you seeing any? Are people talking about schools? Are they talking about Narcan? Is there any conversations that are changing?
I would say so. We have, like I said, we go into a lot of schools, and almost every single day we have at least one educator. In total, we've got 8 educators total for like Eastern Tennessee, and every single day we have somebody who gets a question about fentanyl. And here we are, we're going in just talking about mental health. What is it? Who has it? But every single day somebody's asking about fentanyl, and it's what are the schools doing? What are parents doing? How can we as community members help? So like Narcan is definitely something that we're hearing a lot more about, but I don't know if it's just us being like in the position that we are in, or if everybody's talking
I
about
think I'm
it.
just from like even law enforcement, they're the words out, that just let's unwind them out, even touching things like that. I think even those disciplines are even the scary thing.
So it's an interesting thing because, and actually in the Train the Trainer I have packets, if you look it up, there's an EMS handout on fentanyl. I used to be a firefighter actually. I think it's really interesting, so fentanyl doesn't just absorb in your hands. And so that became sort of a misconception because they were myth or whatever. And it really, and then, I don't know if you watch Blue Bloods, I don't even have TV, like I'm in rural America, like I have Netflix that I can watch on my phone, right? And so I was somewhere and there was a Blue Bloods episode and the wife of, I don't know, Wahlberg or whatever, touched fentanyl. And he was like, yeah, that's what happens when you touch fentanyl. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
Come on, folks, we need to the right information in the right hands, not the wrong information. But I think, so there's a lot of work that we need to do. And, I know even with the rainbow fentanyl, I remember, my grandmother's 97 and I FaceTime her almost every day. And she's like, I saw on ABC News the rainbow fentanyl. Well, the first articles were pretty accurate. And then it was like, oh my gosh, it's going to be like razor blades in the apples, which never happened. And they're going to look just like Skittles. They do not look like Skittles. They are rainbow colored or they are not. Either way, they look like regular pills. That is the point. And I think we really have to do a lot more conversation about, okay, let's get out accurate information because kids are taking what they think is Percocet. They think legitimately it's Percocet.
Died at my son's school, and then Bristol is half of the cities in Tennessee, half is in Virginia. So you're probably going
I'm going there, I drove by it.
So and then on the Virginia side, at that high school, they had 2 kids overdose at school.
Yeah.
And, and one of my friends is a teacher, and she called me, and she's like, can you guys come and help? And it was the same day that, our manager had been on the phone with the school. Cause I called them and I was like, okay. But they had, I think did you go to the school? And they had an awareness day, to teach the kids about it, but it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's in the weed, it's in the.
Yeah.
That's not really a Xanax.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very nefarious, it's really scary, and that's why we have to really, and not be denying it. I think it's, I know for a lot of schools, it's sort of like, but not in our school. It's like, it's never really been that way, I don't think, folks.
I think that the communities are also coming together a little bit more than I've ever seen before. I know there was I guess what they would, I don't know if they classified it as a cluster overdose, but there were, I think, 4 or 5 young men in Johnson City about a month ago that had, I think what the ultimate thing was later on, but that cocaine that had fentanyl in it. And I saw, like the night before, we all got messages and emails like, hey, can you be on this conference video tomorrow morning? And a pastor at a church had actually initiated this whole thing. And there were people on it was a Zoom meeting. There were people on there from all over Northeast Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, and they were all coming together to say, hey, this is an issue that we need to educate people on, that we need to be aware of, and just kind of like, what can we do to help?
Yeah.
And so that was the first time that I had actually seen that big of a group of communities or representatives from those communities coming together and just saying, what can we do now? Like, where can we get the statistical data on why, these things are happening, how often are they happening, that kind of thing. I think there were some representatives from the health department there. So there was a lot of collaboration between communities just to start that conversation of this is a problem, now what?
Yeah.
And so I'm glad to see that kind of progressing across the board because, before, if something, I know growing up here, we didn't talk about that. Like that was the first thing when I told my parents that I had a drug problem, is just don't tell nobody. It was one of those things where it could, if it were now, I'm sure they would have an awareness to say, okay, well, let's get you some help. But rather, they took me to my pastor, which, he tried, but he had no idea, wasn't educated on those things. But now I'm seeing more of the churches being involved and having representatives be educated, having Narcan trainings conducted, on a Wednesday night, after services or something like that. So I feel like we're moving in the right direction. It's just a little progress at a time, but it is progress nonetheless.
Did you want to say something?
No.
Okay, so this is we've been talking about different people's paths, and in some of the videos, people talked about what's happened to them, but what makes people want to change? Is that Monday?
I want to better provide for my children and be more emotionally stable and emotionally stable.
My personal experience was I was so sick and tired of being sick and tired and running from the law and from nothing. I was in a method psychosis pretty much and was scared of my own shadow for so long. There was a lot. And then that shift happened when I was in Hawkins County Jail. On my birthday, my mom came and visited me. They told me she had breast cancer. And it was just like something flipped in me. And I was like, all right, God, here it is. Here, I didn't take this. Take it from me and take it right now because I'm not going to have my family mourn me any longer while there's breath in my body. I was terrified my mom was going to die. So that was my main thing.
Yeah. I think sometimes we forget, if 45 million people in the country experience substance use disorder and 23 million are in active recovery, the data actually shows that those people will eventually have the opportunity to experience recovery. Fentanyl may be the thing, right? There's stuff happening that but
really the data shows that people will at some point, might not be the first, the second, the third, but recovery can happen. And I think, what makes people change, I will tell you, when I was in one of the communities, and I think it was in Ohio, no, it was in Prestonsburg actually, somebody said that she went to a treatment facility, was working with somebody, and they said they didn't have any beds, and that woman stayed up all night long and called all over the state to find her a bed. And she said that was the first time that anyone showed me that kind of care and love, and that was it. So I think we really, to me, it's sort of like why it's so important for people to share stories, because it really sometimes, it's not like the old rock bottom, you just have to be rock bottom.
Jail was like the best thing that ever happened to me because I had no access. And I literally, even before I got my life to Christ, that was the happiest I had ever been. Yeah. Even though I was distraught.
Right.
But still, I was
clear.
I didn't have to fight in that turmoil. I don't want to get high, but I can't not.
Yeah. Well. Okay, Renee. She said I knocked on the door and they said, well, it doesn't just work that way. What if they said, nope, it doesn't work that way. Come back next week or in 3 months.
Unfortunately, that happens a lot because our resources are so limited. I mean, and it's heartbreaking sometimes because, you might stay on the phone for hours calling all over the state trying to find that person a bed or trying to find a safe place for them to go. And it's just not there. Sometimes, whether insurance is a barrier or lack thereof, transportation, there's so many limitations on the resources that individuals have sometimes. It's just it's not there. And then they lose hope. And I think that hope is a catalyst to being able to be successful. Sometimes for hope, that is the thing that makes them want to change. They see just a little bit of something that kind of intrigues them or changes their mind, or maybe thinks, well, if she can do it, well, I know I can do it, like if she was, and a lot of that comes again back to that, that self-stigma that we have for ourselves. But, sometimes that little bit of hope, even if it's just a little bitty bit, that's what that's what we hang on to get out, to pull ourselves out. But in this case, sometimes people, and I've had multiple people, say, well, why should I even try? And it's just, again, the stigma kind of factors into it. If you have an individual that you have that's maybe spent most of their adult life in active addiction, maybe especially in small rural communities, creating, a spectacle of themselves and, their family, and, maybe there's all kinds of factors that rolls in. But then when they want to change and they start doing the work and they start, building a better life for themselves, but because of their past and the things that they've done before, they're stigmatized for those things. There's a lot of barriers, especially for around here, transportation is a big issue. Housing is a big issue. And if you have a felony on your record, being able to have accessible, living conditions, if you want to go get an apartment, sometimes that's not always it's not always possible. Or if you have lost your driver's license, trying to get those back. I worked with an individual, she was my first participant when I first started working with Ballad, and she just now got her license back a couple of months ago. And I mean, it's been a long journey, and there was times that I felt like, oh my gosh, just giving up, we're not going to get there, because there were just so many barriers, so much money that she had to pay back, so much, red tape that she had to cut through, court filings that had to be done, but she did it. Yeah. But there are times in there where she was just like, what's the point? They're not going to give me a chance. And her felony is a traffic violation. Because she's had so many, it ends up progressing her into a felony. And it's I can kind of see if it's, a really harmful offense of some sort, but, traffic things, being a felony and keeping you from getting an apartment or whatever, that there are a lot of people that they keep facing those, they keep hitting walls. And eventually they're just like, what's the point? I'm just
gonna give up. And then they revert back to those old behaviors, those old habits, those old associations that they had. And, you know, that was a big part of my journey, was I kept, you know, hitting these walls and not being able to get here or there where I wanted to be. And, you know, like, patience is a part of the process, you know, like, that's something we have to learn. But, you know, going through those different walls that you have to knock down, those barriers that you have to overcome, sometimes it's just, you know, in that moment for that person it's too much, you know? And that's why I'm so grateful that we have, you know, peer recovery specialists and recovery advocates and things like that now, that actually walk that journey with them. You know, maybe, you know, give them some encouragement along the way and try to, you know, encourage them to, you know, just, you know, wait the process out. You know, we'll get there. It's not going to be today, but, you know, it might be tomorrow, it might be next week, it might be next year, but we're going to get there. And, you know, but if it's just that person doing it themselves or they're trying to navigate that alone, man, that's a scary place to be.
Yeah.
You know, for Renee, you know, part of the human nature is wanting to fight, wanting to live, you know, and part of that is having that next hit because you feel like you're going to die. You know, in her case, you know, obviously that's where she was, but, you know, if she had they not worked with her, had they not extended and provided her the resources and worked with her, you know, in her mind, it may be, as opposed to what do I need to do in order to live, what do I need to do in order to die, because I can't go any further with this.
Yeah.
You know, and she may have harmed herself in such a way where that was it, you know, normal Renee.
Well, good news on Renee. The nice thing about going back to this community is she has been running a facility for 20 years and in recovery for 25. So, you know, just lots of good stories, right? Lots of good things are happening. So Sean was the person who called himself an addict, and he said, "That's not what I am, but who I am." And Sean sometimes brings up some conversation. Because of people's feelings about listening to Sean. Any thoughts?
Well, you know, part of the definition of disease is something that is foreign to the body. Whether it be cancer or, you know, your pancreas is not working right, then something is out of kilter one way or the other. And for him, you know, to define it as a disease, you know, is part, I guess, of his process in recovery. And still, you know, his wording is, I will always be an addict, I'm currently an addict, you know, but it's, there's something foreign is in the body, whether, you know, it is by way of abuse of drugs, or if it's something like cancer or heart disease or something, it's not the norm within the human context.
Interesting. I have to step out a little early, but I did want to say, when I heard that, we always tell folks, right, your mental illness does not define you.
Right.
And we always, especially with kids, we say, you know, we're not focusing on labels, we're focusing on experiences.
Yeah.
And so it's such an interesting conversation to have because yeah, does this addiction define who I am? Or is it just an experience that I'm having, right?
And also for him, does it define who he is? He said it took 7 years, okay, but he's, you know, been in recovery now, another 2 years later, right? Has that changed for him? And so I think one of the conversations is, if that's what he's defining, that is, I've had people say, well, that's stigmatizing. It is, but that's his path. And that's the hard thing. Interestingly enough, I was in a workshop and we were talking about this, and I said, well, I have a nephew who's schizophrenic. And somebody said, really quietly, because she didn't want to embarrass me, she said, a person with schizophrenia. And I said, what did I say? And she said, I said, oh, we do it, right? We use words, we say words that we don't really think about that.
And they've changed over the years too. They changed. So, I mean,
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in all the correct terminology, but I think the introduction of person-first language is a really key factor in people being able to not identify with their experiences. That's not their identity, that's just their circumstance or their experience. I love that, and I encourage people often not to label themselves, you know, but if that is their pathway, that's again where we have to grant that grace of, you know what, that's their thing, you know, if that works for him, if it works, it works. It works if you work it. So run with it, buddy. I mean, that's really where you have to be on that, because you can't tell someone, well, your pathway is wrong. Because that creates more issue for that person, so.
I'm gonna say something like going back to Renee, that scenario, I think the question is like, what would have happened if she had if they had not responded and she knocked on that door? I think too, that maybe goes back to the second bullet point about maybe she was at her point.
Yeah.
You know, a week later, she may not have been at that point when they were able to accommodate her. And I would just say, like, from a healthcare perspective, like, we're fixers. We want to give, if you come in with high blood pressure, we want to give you that PLC next week and everything's good. And when we see people having a crisis, like, we want to talk to your blue in the face. We want to give you these resources. We want you to go seek help. And I think that's a frustration on our part. Like, we want to fix, we want to help, and we want people to take ownership of that. And then when they come back next week, next month, and we're like, we're still in the same cycle, you know.
Yeah.
I think it's a point of frustration and burnout, kind of not intentionally, but we want people to take ownership. And like I said, we're just fixers. Like, we want to fix those things, and it's just kind of a point of frustration when you see that, and it's something that we have to work on our own biases, you know, and those things not just biases, because we want it to be fixed, and give you the resources and go fix it. And like we talked about, unfortunately, the resources is not abundant here, and there's plenty of obstacles, and just being at that, I think it's kind of hard to get people on the right path to the right resources when they're in the right mindset to accept those.
Yeah. All right. So the last thing that I have that we're going to do, you know, I've been to different workshops and seen workshops on stigma, and when people sort of talk about stigma, but hi, thank you so much. Good luck with your PhD. When somebody sticks it out for a PhD, oh goodness. So let's end thinking about our positive beliefs, because, you know, we can talk about stigma and go round and round, but if we don't talk about what our positive beliefs about recovery are and all of that, then we're sort of ending at the wrong place. And so I really want to end with sort of what are the positive beliefs that we have about opioid use disorder or substance use disorder and recovery?
Recovery is possible.
I believe most people are good, and that they want to, that they want to assist. You know, I think those biases and those stigmas come into place, but I think generally most people are good and have good hearts and want to see the good in people.
Ah, yeah. What else?
I think we're moving in a positive direction. You know, there's more resources, there's more awareness, there's more education.
Oh, resources. Yeah. Great. What else?
I think of recognition, just the awareness that one size does not fit all.
Yes.
Yeah. What else?
That's basically what I was gonna say, but there's so many different pathways for individuals to find their recovery. And they change those pathways till they find what fits for them.
I would label that as progression, because if you think about it, years ago, the only thing you ever heard about was AA or NA. And now the options are plentiful. People are able to try things and see what works for them, and kind of, that one size doesn't fit all, one pathway doesn't fit all, one pathway doesn't fit the one person, the entire recovery.
Yeah.
It changes.
Yeah, it's sort of like Sean, right? Like,
Yeah.
in a year from now, you might say, I'm a person in long-term recovery. Yeah. Awesome.
I think there's an awareness that maybe organizations that were not around the table 10 years ago are now around the table. I mean, I think even in our own department, through the Tennessee Department of Health, we see, our role and what we can do, even from a community health level, in addressing addiction, how we can have a role in that, even with our own staff, and how do we work with our clients coming in, that we've got patients coming in, and we recognize on a basis, and the trauma and those things, and how do we make that work when that clinician's behind the door. Maybe nothing more than working with the weak patient or providing immunizations, but have appreciation for what their background is and what will be those experiences.
Yeah, I see, we've come so far, and we have far to go, but we really have.
Peer recovery specialist.
Yeah.
People in recovery being part of the solution.
Yeah, nothing about us without us. And I think ultimately, like to your point, ultimately it takes just community. That's the base of it. People coming together from different perspectives, different walks of life or different professions, and actually just being willing to help, willing to do something different, willing to be accepted.
Yeah, I was telling you, I was in Nogales, and Martin, who is one of the peer recovery people, says peers are the special sauce in recovery. I think I said it yesterday. Okay, so the last thing I like to do, I'm going to give you just a sticky note, and if you will, write your takeaway, one or two or whatever you want. What did you learn today? What did you hear today? What did you really think, oh, that made a lot of sense today? I'm going to take that away, think about it tomorrow, or follow up on. So what was your takeaway from today?
I don't need to do it.
This is almost said, I almost made him do it.
I'm just a fly on the wall.
Do you need a pen?
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
I have one thing to add to your positive beliefs, though, if you want. It's never too late to turn it around. It's never too late. Hey, as long as you're breathing.
I wrote a college paper on you.
On me? I hope it was good. I hope it was positive.
It was on changing your mind about people with addiction and people that had some of these things going on. And I'll have to say, I'm never going to say this to you, but I appreciate the fact that you've been more embracive of people in recovery, and you've been supportive of the recovery community here, more so than just about any other newspaper editor around here. So
Oh, well,
thank you for doing that.
you're welcome. I'm glad to do it, but, it's part of the job. And maybe I'm more sensitive to these things than the average person because I've seen a lot in my life also. So. Did you get a good grade?
I did. It was one of those where we had to write like we have to write the argumentative paper and the informative paper. Yeah, I did not like them either, but that was, I'm pretty sure that yours was the informative. I was arguing that being informed was a big thing. And yeah, that was it. But I did get an A.
I'm glad I could help.
I used to spell like a daggone genius.
I was homeschooled, spelling is always horrible.
All right, let's just go around. Who wants to start us off? What was your takeaway from today? Anybody?
I just think from a perspective of somebody that is not a recovering addict, what I've seen is that the general population doesn't really understand your perspective. We look at people differently, and our words, as we were doing some of this, and I'm looking at the word should, recovered, and I'm thinking, we tell you that, you should. Well, who are we? Because we don't know. We haven't walked where you have walked. And I think that probably the best places that recovering addicts could be is in the shoes where you guys are helping those people. Because who better to help somebody when you've already been there? Because I certainly can't do that because I don't know. You're going to look at me and go, because I don't know. Yeah, you. So, I mean, these are things that I've learned is that just, I think the general population just doesn't really have that true understanding if they don't understand who an addict is, what has caused that. Because like you said, they're all different. What brought me here is different than what brought her here. And we just don't understand. We don't have that understanding to.
And I think that's the first thing that Valley has. Guys.
We're very grateful. That's
Well, I can't speak for everybody, but
I'm very grateful.
Thank you for feeling.
Yeah, this is awesome. I never thought in a million years I'd be able to get a professional job where I can do what I'm doing now and get further educated. I mean, it's awesome. It's just awesome.
And we are a second chance employment program in and of ourselves.
Yeah.
But one thing I love about Val, and this is kind of what I'm writing down here, is I can speak about my faith. I'm not, trying to convert everybody, but my recovery story is faith-based. It's Jesus. I don't shove it in people's throats. I've had people like, I'm a Wiccan. Can you find me a Wiccan rehab? Well, don't know that there is one.
Well, we'll try.
And I was locked in a room for 45 minutes with the Satan worshiper, just because at the time when we were finished with our paperwork, there was an incident and the guard couldn't unlock the door. But I didn't judge her, But I'm able to speak about my faith. There's a lot of, I don't know what's the word, entities, companies, programs, that you wouldn't be able to do that. You know, you're not allowed to speak about your faith. But through ballot, that's one of their key things. But conversation is good, and I think it would be so much better if this room was absolutely full of people who had no idea, like you said, who didn't have experiences. Maybe they have family members, but my little thing I wrote down is that conversation is good, and that, you know, my recovery, I truly, for myself, don't believe. What's your name picture on this? For me.
Yeah.
But I don't judge, and I don't ever try to make somebody else believe that about themselves. I don't say that to people. But in this setting, I can say that, because I wouldn't ever want to discourage someone from seeking their path. I mean, if how they have to believe every single day, if I had to do that, and I had to worry that today was going to be the day, it wouldn't have worked for me. Yeah. But it does for a lot of people, and I see it, and I think it's wonderful. I was crying whenever, what's her name, said, you know, that she knocked on the door and was like, I want to die, and it just, it's so touching, you know. I've never been to rehab. I don't know what that's like. I didn't use recovery meetings for strength. I used my Jesus, but that's not for everybody.
So, my biggest takeaway was learning different opinions. I always enjoy hearing somebody who has no prior addiction experience or even family member experience, and hearing the different point of views, and just seeing that change in people, and seeing the change in the community with like the light bulb being turned on, like, oh yeah, we can actually help these people, or let me call somebody who can help you. You know what I mean? Yeah. And another thing is you don't have to let your addiction define you anymore. Yeah.
Really?
Take away.
There's a famous psychologist, Jay Adams, who wrote a book, Competently Counseled. And in agreement with what you're saying, they did studies, so this is clinically proven that if you send 100 people to a secular counselor for 2 years, there'll be 15% recovery. If you send those 100 people to a Christian counselor and they put Jesus as a component, there'll be an 85% recovery. If those 100 people don't have access to any counselor, there'll be 15% recovery. I think Jesus is a really big piece to the puzzle, but that's beside the point. We indicated that we need to educate society around us. That's a big function. Kentucky in 2003, one of the congressmen formed an organization called Operation Unite, and it works in a three-pronged basis. But that they have become a 32-county organization that has clout enough to change the laws in Kentucky, but at the same time to offer all kinds of support systems and mechanisms within the counties of the group they support. We need that in Tennessee. If we're second worst in meth, if we're second worst in prescription drug abuse, then that means that we're the worst state in the United States. We're not second, we're worst. We're the worst end of the worst state. And nobody, in my recollection, in the last 10 or 20 years, and we've known this, has run for office and said, I'm going to declare war on drugs. You don't hear that. Why not? You know, a little bit of frustration, but it should be. It should be something, because once you declare war on drugs, then the culture around you says, hey, we can make a difference. We're going to work on this thing together. We're going to see this thing eradicated. And then you're going to begin to see the businesses step up, and you're going to see the churches step up, and you're going to see these other groups step up, because as a society we begin to work together. And we've got a goal and we believe that we can make a difference in that goal. And states that have done this have made a difference. So a little bit of all of that put together today is yes, we can make a difference. Yes, it can be positive. We don't have any room for negative in it. And yes, with God, all things are possible. I believe in that component of it too. But as we could work together, if there was an organization that would be an East Tennessee type organization, and the groundwork for something like that's already been laid through what has been done successfully in other states, Operation Unite is just one example, then you can implement those. My child, education is a big thing. And, you know, there's SAMHSA has 330 evidence-based programs that are approved to be used in school systems. And we're not half, we're not 50% down. We're the worst end of the worst state. So if we are, why isn't somebody doing something about it? You know, frustration again. But the school system in Tennessee will tell you that any of those 330 programs, and some of them are absolutely free to the school system, that if any of them, if SAMHSA approves it, they're approved from Tennessee. But they said that the county has to make the decision to use them. So then you go to the county and ask the county, why aren't we using this? There's only 3 one-hour programs from the 5th grade through high school. 3 hours against all the 168 hours a week. So you are working from that standpoint, and the school system says, well, the curriculum they give us doesn't give us any time for that. Well, if I was superintendent of our local school system, we would have time. If I was on the school board, we would have time. We would make time for the worst epidemic, this is epidemic, we would make time for that to happen. Every month, from the 1st grade through the 12th grade, we would have programs implemented in our school system. We'd save the next generation. And then the generation that's already experiencing the problem, we would begin to see. So if you work it all together, if everything comes together and works together, and people begin to see some hope and some glimmer of light, then you get everybody starting to jump on board with you, saying, yes, we can do this thing. And we can make a difference in the next 10 or 20 years to see, there should be a goal out there to see drugs, they're out of the picture. That's not going to be our worst problem. It might be one out of 10, but it's not going to be 9.9 out of 10. Does that make sense? So, Jennifer invited me because I'm passionate.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer.
Just outline your calling.
I know, I didn't want to say anything, we're going to talk about it after you. You first person right here. Jennifer, you want to go?
Yeah. So, Sheldon has done so much for this community as far as, and what I wrote down was that we're making progress, and progress paves the road to success in the next stage in the future. I see in this community, having grown up here, that there is a lot of progress that has happened. There are changes that have been made. There have been more people that are maybe listening or speaking up or coming out and saying, hey, I have an issue, or maybe it's mental health, maybe it's addiction, whatever it may be. More people are talking that didn't talk before. And although opinions are different, like I know Sheldon was talking about the war on drugs, for me, I don't think if you eradicate just the drugs, you're still going to have a problem, because I'm a person that has an addictive personality, so it doesn't matter if it's Oxycontin or if it's chocolate. I could abuse anything if my mind is not in the right place. So for me, my recovery is accepting the fact that I'm not going to go out here and if I am around drugs, then I'm going to have this craving. For me, God healed that in me. But I still have to be accountable for the fact that I'm a human being and that my flesh is weak. And I have to be accountable for those things in myself that I know are not exactly attuned to the rest of society. And so for me, I feel like there needs to be a campaign for, mental health, implementing those programs in the schools instead of that's like they're saying, instead of pulling people out of the river, let's go upstream and figure out why they're jumping in or falling in or whatever's going on up there. So I feel like that's where we need to start, is education and awareness and being accepting of people and their different, the diversity there. There has to be some kind of change progressively as we go forward, because what we've done before is obviously not working. And if we don't change what we've done before, we're going to end up with the same result that we've always had. So why not say, hey, you know, we can make a difference. Well, you can do this, and this organization can do that. Let's come together and make it happen. And I feel like more of that is happening now, because, I mean, you know, like the Department of Health a couple of years ago did the Tennessee Faces of Opioid campaign. And, you know, that was a big awareness here in this community for people, you know, not just here in Hawkins County, but elsewhere. You know, they put billboards up, there were signs of different places and stuff. So having that out there for people to just look at and see, well, gosh, I didn't know that person had that, you know, going on or whatever. Well, this, you know, it kind of creates awareness. It prompts questions. Yeah. And then, you know, like talking about putting programs in the schools. Greene County, actually, our program is actually going to be going into Greene County middle schools and teaching the Bachman life skills curriculums, smoking cessation and substance sections in that curriculum. And I'm really grateful that, you know, first of all, foremost, that Ballard is, you know, supporting us doing that. But that, you know, we have progress. We have a county that's willing to step up and say, you know, hey, let's do it here. And of course, you know, there was a process that we had to go through with reviews with the school board and things like that, but it's a start. Yeah. It's bringing those conversations up. So I'm very happy to see the progress that we have going on here.
Last but not least,
I was just going to say, just the opportunity to create awareness at all levels. We try to remove that stigma and that shame. And I think that there's people who've all been affected by it one way or the other. You know, sometimes it's substance abuse, sometimes it's substance misuse. Someone had a legitimate reason to have started out with that medication and they ended up now using it for something else and those type of things. And something we've not talked about is neonatal absence syndrome. And for our state, from Knox County, Knoxville, all the way to Mount City, which is 22 counties, we have to own that. 60 to 70% of the NAS babies are in that area of the state. And public health, we've always, not joked, but heart disease, stroke, we've always blamed on West Tennessee. They said, well, if we could just keep Memphis out of the equation, our numbers would look better as far as heart disease, stroke. In this case, we cannot put that at Memphis, West Tennessee's doorstep. They don't have that issue like we have from Knox County to Mount City here in the upper part of the state. So that's just another component that, you know, as public health, we've been aware for years because we were seeing the data, knowing that these children born addicted were going to end up in school systems. And now you're seeing those, you see those children in the school system that are really having issues inside the classroom. And when those students started showing up in the classroom, it was very overwhelming to our teachers and staff in those systems, seeing these children coming into existence.
all right, well, I want to say thank you. I'm off to Greenville. I'm off to Greenville. So if you want, what happens is I will keep track of all of the positive beliefs, and then I also, if you want to put your takeaway, your sticky, if you want to sticky your thing on that positive beliefs, because I always write up a quarterly report, and sometimes I'll put in things, and then I'll put in a bunch, and they'll take a few to share with her stuff. Excuse me. So again, I want to say thank you. It is an honor to be here, and if you would take either do the post survey now or set it up on your phone so that you can do that, that would be great, because we are keeping track of that and able to share that data. So again, I really appreciate it, and we'll probably be following up afterwards, I think, from when we have everybody's emails and all of that kind of stuff. And you'll hear from us if you want. So thank you, and thank you.